Good morning, Madam President. We're recording.
This meeting is being recorded.
Thank you. The Acting Board Secretary, please call the roll.
Good morning and welcome to the regular meeting of the Board of Water and Power Commissioners. Today is Tuesday, May 10, 2022. This proceeding is broadcast on Channel 35. The exact broadcast times can be found by contacting Channel 35. Roll call. Board President McCLAIN-HILL.
Present.
Commissioner Brad Hopkins.
Present.
Commissioner LEHRER.
Present.
3 members and a quorum. Thank you.
Thank you, and I apologize for our
I'm
starting.
sorry, Commissioner, can I do my...
Oh, I'm sorry,
blurb?
Joe. Yes, please.
It's okay. In conformity with California Assembly Bill AB 361, signed into law on September 16th, 2021, and due to public health concerns and directives issued by the Mayor of Los Angeles and the Los Angeles County Public Health Department regarding reducing the spread of COVID-19, some members of the board will be appearing virtually today. Also, all public comment will be taken virtually. Members of the public wishing to call in and offer public comment may do so by calling 213-306-3065. Again, that number is 213-306-3065. When prompted, please enter meeting code 249-927-68817. Again, that meeting code is 249-927-68817. People wishing to offer public comment will be provided 2 minutes per item, up to a total of 5 minutes for all items that they're speaking on. Callers, when calling in, please state whether you are speaking on general public comment or on a specific item. We may recess if we encounter technical difficulties or lose a quorum. Thank you. Commissioner, back to you.
Thank you so very much. I appreciate that. And I want to apologize for the meeting starting so late. When I walked into the building, a couple of employees said, "Hey, I just saw you on TV with the mayor." I have to say that is not the reason that we are starting late. Both I and our general manager, who was also there, were back on time. I take full responsibility and will do better moving forward. Moreover, the subject of that press conference, I will leave to Mr. Adams and Mr. Collins to address during their portion of the meeting. That said, I'd like to open the meeting by recognizing that May is Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And in tribute to not only our many, many employees of AAPI descent, but also in tribute to our recently departed board vice president, I am very pleased to take the lead in the acknowledgement of this month on this day. Documented migration of Asian and Pacific Islanders to the United States date back to 1587. Since then, and for more than 500 years, AAPIs have been part of the fabric of American society, and we here at LADWP celebrate their contributions year-round, but especially during the month of May, Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. AAPI Month was first introduced as AAPI Week in a proclamation signed by then-President Jimmy Carter in October 1978. It was to be observed during the first 10 days of May. That was 391 years after the documented arrival of the first Filipinos on U.S. soil in 1587. In 1990, Congress passed a law expanding the observance to the entire month of May, chosen to commemorate the arrival of the first Japanese to the U.S. on May 7th, 1843, and also the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad on May 10th, 1869, which was built predominantly by Chinese immigrants. Today, AAPI Month recognizes the contributions and important role in American history of the more than 24 million residents and citizens of the United States who trace their roots to more than 20 countries in Southeast Asia, the Indian subcontinent, and Pacific islands of Melanesia, Micronesia, and Polynesia. AAPIs are a force that have shaped American culture and society for centuries. They are public officials, doctors, lawyers, healthcare workers, skilled workers, merchants, social workers, community activists, and drivers of change. The myriad state and federal actions and local event celebrations recognizing AAPIs for what they are doing are affirming and laudable. That said, many people of Asian and Pacific Islander descent continue to be stereotyped, ostracized, otherwise, and discriminated against. In recent years, especially following false, inflammatory, and damaging rhetoric that blamed COVID-19 on Asians, many AAPIs became victims of hate crimes. A recent LA County poll revealed that 2/3 of Asian Americans in LA County worry for their safety and fear becoming the subject of racial attack. 80% say that Asian American racism is a serious problem, and nearly 25% say they experience verbal or physical abuse or damage to their property because of their racial or ethnic background. Be clear, this is the experience of our friends, our neighbors, family members, and colleagues right here in LA County. These events are all too reminiscent of the painful history of which far too few of us are aware. The Chinese massacre in 1871, right here by Olvera Street, the incarceration of Japanese Americans sent to concentration camps in the 1940s, and the Chinese Exclusion Act, which barred all Asian immigrants, including Chinese, Japanese, Koreans, and Indians, from becoming naturalized U.S. citizens and prevented them from marrying Caucasians or owning land. The good news is we need not be defined by our past, and the contribution of generations of AAPI citizens is a testament to their resilience, to their brilliance, and to their stalwart conviction and contribution to the civil fabric of our society. We at LADWP stand with our AAPI colleagues and communities. We're committed to continuing our push to ensure fairness and equality for all through meaningful action, impactful policymaking, hiring practices, and outreach programs that challenge systemic racism and create equity and opportunity. During AAPI Heritage Month, may we all reflect, find joy, and stay hopeful. And to all of our AAPI employees and communities, we celebrate you and thank you for your resilient spirit and your work in service of a stronger LA and a better nation. Thank you. And with that, I would like to move to general public comment. Before doing so, I'd like to welcome Camden Collins to the dais. It's a rare occurrence that you're here and not Fred, so welcome and thank you.
Thank you.
Public comment?
Good morning, callers. Please state your full name and item number you're calling on. You will have 2 minutes for comment. Our first caller is Donald Lozay. Please state your name and the item number you're calling on.
I'm Donald Lowe's. I'm calling about water conservation. I live in Santa Monica Mountains, and I know that we're facing an issue that the department is trying to deal with. But I'd like to point out and remind us all that the city is divided in 2 ways, one of which includes zoning for very high fire severity zones. Those high fire severity zones contain vegetation that requires water and somewhat different from the other parts of the city, although it's important that the trees in the city, which provide us shade and all the other things that we all know about, get an appropriate share. the directions for watering that are forthcoming should be very clear and specific, distinguishing, if at all possible, the water for the high fire severity zones from the other parts of the watering process. Uh, we would like to know what conversations have been had with other departments of the city, the LA Fire Department, Biological Services, and Planning, and what discussions have been held with the insurance companies to address how all of this can be handled sensibly and to the benefit of the ratepayers and the cooperation of everybody else in the city. This is a very broad, complicated problem, and I hope the department and the commissioners will have had done some study advising the neighborhood councils of exactly what has been considered and the information available, or if not, to provide in the future some kind of a plan
Thank
which
you, caller.
coordinates
Please wrap up
the
your comments.
information.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Next caller, Michael Littman. Please state the item number you're calling on.
Attorney Michael Littman. Good morning. This is Attorney Michael Littman. I'm calling in reference to the closed session commission item number 4 concerning the Jones class action and the associated mess with that litigation. Should I comment now or should I reserve it before the closed session starts?
You can go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. Again, my name is Michael Littman. I am one of the attorneys who worked on the Jones matter. I don't know if the commission is aware of it or not, but I was the liaison counsel in Jones versus City of LA, which was removed by improperly, I'm arguing, by a court order. I'm currently in litigation. I have a federal complaint that is pending in the United States Central District in Los Angeles, case named Lippman versus United States et al., including the City of LA, case number 221 CV 09455. I am not sure if the commission is aware of it because my review of the minutes and the prior meetings going back to December since the complaint was filed does not show that this lawsuit is being addressed. The lawsuit alleges, the federal complaint alleges conflicts of interest between Mr. Fuhr from Brown and Mr. Eric George and Mr. Kabatek, who has been installed as a newly appointed class counsel. Mr. Kabatek has submitted a bill to the court asking for $5 million in fees that I believe the commission should scrutinize. It is represented by Ms. Kabatek LLP that the city is not objecting to his $5 million fee application for work that we believe brought no benefit and only caused waste.
Thank you.
The,
Thank you, caller. Can you please wrap up your comments?
Yes. So I would like to know if the commission has information whether, in fact, the billing by Mr. Kabatek and Kabatek LLP was indeed approved by the city.
Thank you, Mr. Littman. Next caller. We have Allison Weber.
Hello, my name is Allison Weber, and I am once again calling representing the Keep Long Valley Green Coalition. Per the long-term water agreement, the Department of Water and Power is allowed to reduce irrigation allotments in Inyo County after 2 years of less than average snowpack. With snowpack level at 60% of normal as we head into a third year of drought conditions, much less in other places, having had the driest first 3 months of the year in recorded history, no one is shocked that the Department of Water and Power is seeking to reduce the amount of water it allows to stay in the Owens Valley and in southern Mono County. What is surprising, however, is that the status quo allows reductions to the amount of water left in our valley, water that is supposed to support ecosystems, livelihoods, and public health, before reductions in luxury water uses 230 miles away in Los Angeles. When push comes to shove, water necessary to maintain livelihoods and healthy living conditions in the Eastern Sierra should not be sent to Los Angeles to facilitate green golf courses and swimming pools. Instead, we ask the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power look first to eliminating luxury and wasteful water uses in Los Angeles, and second to reducing the amount of water allowed to remain in our valley. The request is in line with the approach LADWP has repeatedly pledged to make with respect to our Eastern Sierra community. For example, on a 2021 response to the Alameda Court ruling that LADWP must continue providing historic quantities of water to lessees in Long Valley, DWP Assistant General Manager Communications and Public Affairs stated, every year LADWP must adapt its water operations to respond to changes in the weather, be it wet or dry, and the needs of the environment and communities we serve. In keeping with this pledge, before reducing the amount of water allowed to stay in our valley, we encourage LADWP to look towards new best practices in water use reduction. The good news is the citizens of Los Angeles have done a great job increasing water conservation over the last 10 years. While the conservation accomplishments of Los Angelinos are a praiseworthy start, much more needs to be done to crack down on wasteful and luxury water uses before any cuts to essential irrigation in Inyo County and Mono County are made. We do not suggest that only LA should have to make cuts and or that the Eastern Sierra should never have to make cuts or lifestyle changes. Instead, we suggest that in this time of water scarcity, DWP perform a more valid evaluation of the needs of the Owens Valley and Los Angeles.
Thank you,
We all
caller.
have to be
Please
more
wrap up your
mindful of water
comments.
change, beginning with reductions in luxury water use. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next caller, please state your name and the item you're calling on. Next caller, digits ending in 47. Please state your name and the item you're calling on. No response. All public comment is now closed. Thank you. Board President.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And if we could move now to report from our general manager.
Thank you very much. Madam President, when you were giving your report and comments on the Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month coming up now in May, it reminded me of the leadership of this board and your leadership, which was thankfully recognized yesterday. I knew you wouldn't say anything, so I thought I would, but you were recognized by LA County as one of the Women Leaders of the Year. Very appropriate. And I think, your concern for not only the public, but for the employees here, and really appreciation seemingly, month in and month out of the rich cultural fabric that we have here at the department and the people who make up the department, which reflects the people who make up the city that we serve. Your recognition of that it just highlights why you're recognized in the LA County as one of the women leaders. So congratulations.
Thank you.
I wanted to point that out so everyone was aware of the award that you received yesterday. Speaking of the Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, we do have a couple activities I'd like to announce. On both Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Aspire, which is the Employee Resource Group, and the Corporate Strategy Communications Division that work together. They have two things planned at this point. There's a virtual forum on addressing Asian American hate. It's on May 17th. Those usually occur at lunchtime. And there's a very interesting class offered called Seniors Fight Back. And it's with a group. It's a self-defense class aimed for seniors, and it's open to all employees. And it'll be conducted here on Saturday, May 21st. And as we've seen, a number of assaults on seniors, unfortunately, growing in society. It's an interesting class to be offered. And so that occurs on May 21st. And there's a bulletin about that employees can access. Again, it's open to everybody. I would like to introduce a very important addition to our team here at Department of Water and Power. Our Inspector General, long awaited. The wait was worth it because I believe we found the right person. I'd like to introduce Sergio Perez. Sergio, would you like to stand up? He's our new Inspector General, hired away from doing a similar job in Orange County. I'm sure they are suffering from the loss, but we are very pleased to have Sergio join us. I know he will work very closely with the board to make sure that we have a new set of eyes overseeing the department. And he has a tremendous background, both in Inspector General type matters, in legal issues, including with the City of LA and the Ethics Commission, and I think he'll be a great addition to us here, and he's looking forward to working with all the members here, including the board. So, Sergio, thank you for joining us, and today is day 2 for him.
Welcome to the
learning his way
department and
around.
welcome home.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Really look forward to working with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. We did have as the board president mentioned, we did have a press event this morning. It was on our change for our water conservation ordinance. We are currently in phase 2, which we've been in for a number of years, which is 3-day-a-week watering. And years ago, in Anselmo's position, I tried to change the phases to match the number of days, but there was some reason it wouldn't work. So we are recommending to the mayor, and the mayor will work with the city council to approve this, to go to phase 3, which will reduce our watering in LA from 3 days a week to 2 days a week. And there's been a lot in the press about a lot of Southern California going to 1-day-a-week watering. I'd like to briefly explain, just so everyone's aware, that a couple weeks ago, the Metropolitan Water District Board adopted a plan to meet the reductions of water available from the State Water Project, and that feeds a good portion of the city. It's the supply that we most easily bring in, and over 95% of the city receives some portion of their supply of State Water Project water. And so what the Met Board did was adopt a plan that they came up with water allotments for each agency, and the agency had a choice to adopt a 1-day-a-week watering policy and enforce that, or accept the water allotment and then manage your own water use. So Los Angeles is deciding to accept the water allotment because of the fantastic job that we have done. This department started water conservation efforts back in 1977, ahead of the time that most anybody else did this, and we've been a national leader in water conservation, which is why our demands are amongst the lowest in Southern California. And that allows us the opportunity to reduce our watering only by 1 day a week to 2 days a week watering, as well as continue to promote all of our conservation programs, in which we briefed the board recently on improvements to our rebate programs and other things. And really an opportunity to work closely with our customers to partner together to reduce water use, stay within the allotment provided by MWD, continue to work to shift water supplies onto other sources as much as we can from the aqueduct, from the Colorado River Aqueduct, away from the State Water Project. And we believe this will protect the environment in Los Angeles. It'll protect the property that people own. At the same time, we'll be able to have tremendous water conservation and what we need to do to meet the allotments that are available from Met. So that was announced this morning at a press conference, actually at a home in Glassell Park, where not too long ago there was a press conference about removing the turf, and their turf removal program. The state asked for 50 million square feet of turf removed. This is several years ago. LA did 51 million by itself. And we have one of the, if not one of the highest turf rebate programs amounts in the Met service area. And we continue to offer that. The home we were at used to have a front yard that if you looked at the slope, all the water must run off when they watered. And so now it's a beautiful California-friendly landscape. As poor President will know, it smelled wonderful. It was supporting bees and other pollinator habitat. And it was really a view of what LA should transition to and what we've been working on. And I think that our continued efforts during this summer will yield a lot of fruit in terms of reducing water demand and help us to meet the challenges of the drought. And Selma, did you want to add anything?
Sure. I just wanted to add for everybody watching that the department has a variety of rebate programs and initiatives that can help you save water. Just to mention a few, we have rebates right now on our washing machines, which has just increased to $500 per item. Our toilet rebate, the most popular one is a turf replacement, which is at $3 per square foot, as the general manager mentioned. But we also have other programs like a free turf removal design service, which allows homeowners that are not certain what removing the turf and putting drought-tolerant material will look like. They can actually have it designed and see what it will look like ahead of time. And the last thing too, for our industrial and commercial customers, we have a technical assistance program that we recently increased up to $2 million that allows these companies to be able to implement water-saving equipment and be able to reduce their water consumption. That's it. Thank you.
So lastly on that, I wanted to add, and we've talked about here about the issue of trees and shade and heat island effect. One of the things that is allowed in the ordinance is the hand watering of trees to make sure they do not suffer losses. And our concern for shade and cooling for our customers, particularly in areas where there's not enough tree canopy, continues. And so we are looking at how to increase our effort in those areas and at the same time, comply with what we need to do for the drought. Lastly, I just wanted to mention that the Lyman's Rodeo is this Saturday. It starts at 7:30 in the morning. I hear there might be a dramatic beginning. I've never been there to see it before, but I will this time. And it goes to an early afternoon. Is that right, Brian?
Yeah, usually the event is finished by 1 or 2 o'clock.
1 or 2
and
o'clock.
we'll do the awards after that.
Yeah.
So by 3 o'clock, it's all done.
So it's a great event. I hope that a lot of folks are able to get out there. We've done a lot of outreach to LA Unified School District to try to promote getting students out there to get them both exposed and interested in careers with the department. So with that, that's my report. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. I appreciate that, and certainly appreciate the acknowledgement with respect to tree canopies and extreme heat as we continue to manage our efforts to meet our customers where they are and to provide them with the support that they need to deal with the rapidly changing climate that we are confronting even as we speak. There are, to my knowledge, no motions to be introduced under item E. So we'll turn to the ratepayer advocate. Camden, do you have any remarks at this time, or would you prefer to hold your comments till later in the agenda?
Our office would like to note its support for items 5, the water bonds, 8, the ITRON contract, and 13, the Air Products recycling, with a large shout out to the water crew for pulling that off. And it's exciting to see that come forward. We have a presentation on items 6 and 7 and would be available for any questions that come up during the discussion or presentations.
And the appropriate time for that presentation is probably after the Financial Services Organization's presentation in I-4.
Okay, thank you. So that's a presentation on items 6 and 7. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Related to the budget.
No, I got it. Thank you so very much. I appreciate that. Do we have at this time any discussion with neighborhood council representatives or neighborhood council community impact statement?
No community impact statements or formal positions were filed by any neighborhood councils on today's agenda items.
Terrific. Thank you. And then with respect to items 6 and 7, I'd like to call those items special. At this time, we will consider items for passage. If there are items, are there any other items that any board member would like to call special?
I don't know the protocol of whether to call special. I just want.
Is there an item that you would like to discuss before we vote on it?
Okay. It is what was reported of what it is that we're doing with regard to the drought and how we're communicating.
No, is it, so we are at this point looking at items that we, from L1 to to L14. So those are the items that we're considering to approve we're trying to determine which of those items we're prepared to approve on the consent calendar. So are there any items, L1 through L14, that you would like to have a presentation on prior to voting? I've already asked that we hear 6 and 7 as independent items.
And item 15 as well, Board President?
Item 15?
Is that we do have a speaker on that.
We have a speaker on item 15?
We do.
Okay, perfect, yes. And item 15 will need to be special as well.
Okay.
So if there's nothing else that we'd like to hear special, is there a motion to approve items L1 through L5, items L8 through L14? Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
I'll second. Would you please call the roll?
Yes, Board President McCLAIN-HILL,
Aye.
Commissioner Broad Hopkins,
Aye.
Commissioner LEHRER.
Aye.
3 ayes, the motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move now to management reports, which will begin with I1, which is a presentation regarding electronic vehicles and fleet electrification update.
So I'd like to bring forward our Director for Power, New Business, and Electrification, Winfred Yancey, to introduce her team for this presentation. And just to note, the last portion of this presentation that you have that was being done by the fleet personnel due to some unforeseen circumstances with the presenters, we won't be presenting that last piece on the update on vehicle, the electrification of the fleet.
So you're telling me that we're deferring the presentation with respect to fleet electrification update?
Yes, if that's what you would prefer, we'll defer that to another presentation.
Okay, thank you so very much. Ms. Yancey.
Good morning, Commissioners. Thank you for this opportunity. Oh, I can take it off?
Yes, Marty's signaling that you can take your mask
Want to make
off
sure I follow
at the...
protocol.
That's right.
Thank you. And now that you can hear me, thank you for this opportunity this morning. We are very excited about all the great things that are going on in the power system as relates to the EV and its initiatives. We also note that the board is very interested in what happens with that because it's very instrumental and important as we talk about LA 100. And so, given that today we did want to focus on the infrastructure that's current and what we have to do to enhance our infrastructure to receive the number of EVs that we know we're going to, in the very short term, have on our system. And so with that, I would like to introduce the team that will be presenting today. Taking the initiative, because we have this moment with you, we would like to actually add a couple other updates, if you will, to the infrastructure opportunity. And Emil Abdel Shahid is the Assistant Director of the Power, New Business, and Electrification Division. And he's going to touch on the readiness of the infrastructure, the maybe even some equity information that we have as it relates to the EV and the deployment of the chargers. And then we'll hear also from Yaman Nan, who, as you might recall, was a part of the EV group in the recent past, and now he's been charged with readying the distribution system, if you will, for the infrastructure, rather, for EVs. So with that, the next voice you will hear is Emil Abdel Shahid. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you, Wendy. Is there a clicker here? Let me go up to the table. I'm not used to all these screens. So we'll go ahead and get started. Just a quick overview on our presentation today. So we will be talking about the grid readiness, how we're preparing the grid for the oncoming electric vehicles, and also what it is, how we get these loads connected to the grid. We want to discuss a little bit about how we're including equity as we roll out these electric transportation programs. We also want to talk about our infrastructure and what we're doing to prepare not only LADWP, but the public as well. And then, as Brian mentioned, we're going to defer that fleet electrification update. So we'll go ahead and jump right in. So looking at, I'm sure you've seen this slide before, but here's a updated slide. And this, we want to put in perspective what we're looking to prepare the grid for. So we're looking at 750,000 light duty and 12,000 medium to heavy duty electric vehicles by 2030, plus 120,000 level 2 chargers and over 3,000 DC fast chargers. When we look at it from an individual load perspective, it's very comparable to one of our highest peak load days. But we look at it from a perspective of how do we manage this load as opposed to just adding capacity. When we look at bringing this load online so that we can start figuring out how to manage it, there's a few items we're doing in the short term in order to prepare to manage this load. So we start off with distribution automation as we build a smarter and more reliable grid, deploying a communication network and sensors that brings back the data we need in order to better manage this load. We also are working with the public, the electric vehicle installers, as we have workshops on the design process and regular meetings with these electric vehicle charger installers to efficiently work with them and bring their loads online. Additionally, we're looking at creative solutions to be able to locally manage this capacity. We look at non-wire alternatives or solutions that do not require us to improve our distribution infrastructure. Looking at the private industry to support local demand at a time when we need that capacity. We're also looking at rate design to be able to incentivize off-peak charging and help our customers shift their load to a time that aligns better with our renewable generation. And finally, working with large customers and government agencies such as Metro, LAUSD, in order to create a master plan and be able to understand all of the pieces to the puzzle on what we're going to need to manage. And then bringing these loads online requires us to look at people and process. So we've created a dedicated EV service design team where we funnel all of our new electric vehicle service requests to this team so they can efficiently process them. A lot of this new load also requires work in our city streets and requires permitting from the Bureau of Engineering. And we've worked out a memorandum of understanding in order to reduce processing times for those permits with the Bureau of Engineering. We continue to look for ways to add staff with expertise on how to manage this this EV demand, not just from a load perspective, but also from a service planning perspective. Actually, some of our staff are at the Advanced Clean Transportation Expo in Long Beach right now. So we look to continue to build that knowledge within our staff. We work with the developer community to look at process improvements. Recently, we met with EVgo to share best practices and figure out ways how to implement process improvements. And we have quarterly workshops with the developer community and our customers. We had one recently last week. And all this is to improve processing time on how to bring these new loads online. So with that, I'll pass it over to Yamin, and he'll discuss what we're doing to prepare the grid.
Okay. Good morning, Honorable Board. So this portion of the presentation is really addressing the board motion from September, which asked to essentially address how a voltage upgrade or conversion will help in terms of being able to host more EVs on our system. So before I get into that part, I just want to kind of bring it back to the LA100 study. So the LA100 study projected that EV charging will add anywhere from about 900 to 2,700 megawatts of load on our system by 2045. Now, the various scenarios that were modeled also tried to show how that load would actually look like in terms of peak demand based on looking at the stack of EV charging, which includes fast charging, public charging, workplace charging, and then home charging. So what we did is we extracted the two charts above from the LA100 study. And sorry if it's a little hard to see on paper, but if you look at the top one, you can see how the EV charging profile would look like if we didn't put any controls or rates that incentivize the right type of charging behavior. So in that top chart, you see that when people start to get home and plug in, what we're seeing is the bulk of charging activities happening between 5 to 8 p.m. And that's a problem because, in a scenario where LADWP's resource mix, starts to rely very heavily on solar energy, that solar energy starts to taper off, right, at that time. And so the chart on the bottom then shows charging profile that is managed, all right, or influenced. So what that does is essentially we're putting in place systems and proper rates. So there's an active component and there's a passive component that is influencing the charging behavior and then helping us to essentially spread out the charging over a longer period of time from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. primarily. And that's when we have, abundant solar on our system. And however, before I move forward, I wanted you to notice that even though managed charging helps to spread out that load, it doesn't make the load go away, right? So we still ultimately have to expand the capacity of our distribution system, right, to accommodate that load. Next slide, please. So one of the initiatives that we've been exploring in order to proactively prepare our distribution system for the onslaught of EV charging is upgrading or converting our distribution system voltage to a higher voltage. So currently we operate two distribution system voltages, primarily a 4,800 volt system called a 4.8 kV system. And we're actually one of the two utilities remaining in North America that still primarily operate that voltage system. Everybody operates a higher voltage. In addition, we have our 34,500 volt system, which is also sometimes referred to as our 34.5 kV subtransmission system. Now, the 34.5 system, even though it can host a lot more load, a lot more EVs, a lot more DERs, it's not available throughout our system. It's only available in about 35% of our service territory. The 4.8 kV system is what's prevalent in our system. So higher voltage lines, they do help to improve reliability. They allow us to enable more DERs. They increase our capacity to accommodate EV charging, and they also, they have in terms of system benefits, they enable more stability. So this is really especially important to customers using DERs or certain manufacturing equipment that's sensitive to voltage fluctuations. But ultimately, again, as you look at this chart here, for example, so if we were to go from a 4.8 kV to a 12.47 kV system, again, this voltage has not been finalized. We're still studying various voltages, and we can get back to you on that. But just an example here, you see, for example, at one location on our distribution system, with 4.8 kV, we can host about 40 level 2 chargers or 2 DC fast chargers. 12.47 allows us to host almost 3 times that much, right? So by upgrading the voltage, the distribution line, we can host 3 times as much at one location, right? Because the problem with 34.5, even though, yes, it can host even much more than 12.47. It's not available in our system. It's very costly to bring those lines to our customers. And also the footprint that's required because of the higher voltage is much larger. And in a city like LA, we don't always have the space for that. So next, please. So what we did about 12 months ago, in order to address the prospect of a voltage conversion, we issued a task to EPRI, the Electric Power Research Institute, to help us evaluate the feasibility and economics of a voltage conversion program. So the approach we came up with, as you see here, the various scenarios, was to look at, okay, if we were to do nothing and just continue, building and expanding our 4.8 kV system, if we were to fully convert our 4.8 kV system to 12.47, or if we were to fully convert our system to 34.5. And then additionally, a final scenario would be to convert portions of our 4.8 kV system either to 34.5 or to 12.47, right? Depending on the scenario, depending on the location, workplace, public charging, et cetera. So what we found out, right, that there are risks involved with every option. So number one being the resources, right? We're going to have to provide adequate resources to implement the voltage conversion program. Essentially, this is rebuilding the system that we've had for 100 years. So it's going to require a big investment in resources. In addition, we'll have to put in place controls to allow us to budget appropriately for such a large capital expenditure, right? And ensure that we hedge for an increase in material costs and changes in technology. Okay, next slide, please. Actually, can you go to the next one, Emil? That one, okay, never mind. Okay, so the budget one, the cost one was taken out. Okay, thank you. So where are we headed with this in terms of implementation and kind of, let's say, preliminary roadmap with this voltage conversion program? So right now, where we're at is we did phase one, which told us, okay, yes, here are the various options. Here's the certain costs associated with options. Here are the certain risks. Now we're looking at actually the implementation. So now we're addressing, the standards and safety protocols, right? What type of safety equipment are we going to have? Right now, our crews, they operate our distribution system live. So this helps, to lower the amount of outages, help lower the duration of outages. So we're going to have to address that, right? And then also the operational orders and, and in our dispatchers, right? They currently are comfortable with the system that we have. They know how to calculate it. They know how to dispatch crews, send it out. All that is going to have to change. There's going to have to be training involved, right, to get them used to the new system. Additionally, what we're looking at is how are we going to actually reconfigure our system to accommodate a higher distribution voltage? Are we going to have to build more substations? Can we actually consolidate substations and perhaps not have to build as much? Right, so what equipment needs to be changed or upgraded on the customer side, because there's that part of it as well, right? Right now we have customer stations located on customer properties that are 4.8 kV, so those also will have to be upgraded. So how do we manage that, and who's going to bear some of those costs? So again, also part of the phase two of the study is picking a pilot site. So this is going to allow us to demonstrate how a higher distribution system voltage will be implemented in our service territory. And then what we could do is take those lessons learned and then develop a system-wide implementation plan, right? And so ultimately what we're moving forward with is we're going to have to put in place a multi-phase plan, right? That is going to focus primarily on expanding our 34.5 kV system, because that is the most robust and most advantageous distribution system that we have, that we've been operating, and that can host the most amount of solar, EVs, and other DERs. So we're going to be expanding that system and looking at, what it's going to take to convert portions of that system and then, build from there. So ultimately what we're looking at right now in terms of timeline, we hope to select the pilot sites by the end of the year. We'll then start designing it, looking at what equipment needs to be purchased, to move forward with that, and then we'll implement that hopefully over the next 4 to 5 years. Then we can take all the lessons learned from that and then develop a full system-wide implementation plan, which will then be rolled out. I mean, this is something that other utilities have done. It's nothing new. However, this is really a 20, 30, 40-year program that essentially we're rebuilding our entire distribution system. However, again, as mentioned, the benefits are numerous, and we look forward to continue pursuing it.
Thank you, Yaman. So jumping back into the electric vehicle portion, we wanted to discuss how we're benchmarking equity and how we're using that as we develop our
Just before you move there, I have a couple of questions about where we are right now, and thank you. It's a very well laid out presentation. I'm just curious as it relates to how we benchmark the work that needs to be done. Yes. And tie it to the specific outcomes that we're trying to achieve, so that we have some way of knowing if we're on track or not on track. If that, because that isn't quite, you haven't quite gotten there in the context of what you just presented. Yeah. But I'm curious as to when you think you can be there.
Right, absolutely, yeah. So that's a very good question, and essentially, a voltage conversion is about expanding our hosting capacity, right, on our distribution system. So we have to build a plan, right? We have to pull an implementation plan that is going to tell us how we're going to actually implement that, right? So for every expenditure that we make, what does it provide us in terms of expanded megawatts, right, on our distribution system? So So I don't have the answer right now completely for that, but that is what we're going to have to do. Ultimately, the part of the expenditure that we're going to make is already part of PSRP. So we're ultimately the what you just said is absolutely correct, because we're going to have to decide: are we going to keep spending money on a system that is outdated and not as robust, or are we going to actually shift over and start putting more resources onto that?
So I guess my question, Marty, Brian, would be, at what point does the rubber meet the road with respect to making those kinds of decisions? And what does that look like from a department execution perspective? Like how does that get teed up? And how does that kind of how does that conversation move forward? Who's engaged in that? And at what point do we have to, get from what we know is possible and align that to what we can actually do, so that we can track it in a way, again, that we can determine on a real-time basis, whether we're going, how quickly or how closely our actions are going to align with our objectives.
Well, I'll start and let Brian do the details. So this is exactly a very good point. So what Brian and I have talked about is that, we will have to have, and the pilot and where that ends up and how it takes place will help us lay out the program. But I've told Brian, so we're going to have to lay out a program that, because it'll be a career program for people or peoples, because it'll take a long time to replace everything we own. But a systematic group that is just tasked with making progress year in and year out and does not get distracted on other projects, does not do other things. Just a concerted effort and dedicated people, both engineering staff and construction forces, who just do this work to change the system. So we won't know exactly how that looks until we do the pilot and find out exactly what is entailed. But we will have to carve out staff that does this. Otherwise, we can't do a little piece at a time here and there as we go. We have to we'll develop the systematic approach, and it'll take a concerted group of employees whose body of their work is to make that happen. Otherwise, people will get sent off to other projects, and they will never get to the future. So we've talked about needing to develop that. We won't know exactly what that looks like until they finish identifying, where the test area is, a pilot area, and we see what's entailed. One of the things that talked about was just in the safety and training, working on 4.8 kV hot is different than trying to do 12 kV, because I think your gloves, your tools and equipment, whether you can work hot or not, are all different. And so Brian can speak more to that.
I was going to say, we've got a water guy explaining.
So I listen carefully, believe me. So I'll let Brian take it from there.
Yeah, very specifically, waiting for that EPRI study is a big part of this. So we're looking at a 40-year commitment, all right, on making a change in the system. And the issues are with our existing system, and what we're looking at going to is you can't really run them in parallel, right? We can't have both systems running together, right? It's going to be a cutover from one to the other. For all of our underground system, that's tearing up every street, replacing every vault, replacing every conduit with a larger size in order to fit a 4-wire system instead of a 3-wire system. So it's a huge undertaking infrastructure-wise, especially for our underground, especially for our downtown areas. In our overhead, it's the same thing. Like Marty was saying, the working conditions are much different. So what we can do now, where we can work on energized lines with rubber gloves, in the higher voltages we cannot. So we can work energized, the 12 kV, right, but it's a completely different system. You have to have sleeves, you can't work from the pole, right? As we change our structure on everything, steel poles and everything, our working rules now change. So that, and the other part of that is putting that system in parallel is very hard to do. It has to be a straight cutover. And then also how our system integrates with each other, where now we have all of our redundancies built in. As we put this new system in, it's hard to tie those two systems together for outages, right, and for reliability and for resiliency. So it's a lot more to the study than just a straight conversion. It's how do we keep those in place. As this relates to EV chargers specifically, and if you go back to that slide where you show how many we can have on each system, when we're implementing this part on EV specifically, this is what we have to consider. What we can do now on our existing 34.5 system or where we go ahead and start our pilots on a 12 kV system will partially be dictated on where we can put EV chargers, right? Where we know our load is going to increase dramatically very quickly. That's where we're going to have to concentrate our pilot program on.
And I just want to add right on something that Marty mentioned with regards to having a dedicated team. We've actually requested a dedicated engineering group to be put in place as part of the budget request that you're going to hear about today. So part of the overall staff and resources. So that is really what is going to allow us to ramp up activity and focus on this effort. Because right now I have the distribution development team who's kind of doing this like as a side job, and it really needs a dedicated team to get us where we need to be in ramp-up efforts.
No, thank you. I appreciate the discussion. I, continue to be, it's like being, shocked with a taser every time I am in a room or at an event where Councilmember O'Farrell talks about 2035 and reminds us that it's 12 years from now. And it just underscores, from my perspective, our need to be really clear about what we can do, how we plan to do it, what the resource commitment's going to be in order to make that happen, what the pain threshold may be. As it relates to, tearing up streets and things of that nature. So I just want to, kind of be really clear myself. We plan incredibly well, and on the page, this is clear and easy to understand, but I just know there's so much more that's off the page between what we talk about and what we do. So thank you. Your reports will be regular, and I will be working closely with, power leadership, again, just to get some means of tracking where we are so that we can be as transparent as possible. I noted the allusion to the distribution automation work that's taking place, and I know all of these are major undertakings, each and every one of them with its own timeline, its own set of complexity. So I will be curious to understand and may ask for you all to present together next time once I get fleet taken care of. I'm curious to understand how these things intersect and how they're moving. And if, in fact, they're sufficiently moving in tandem for us to achieve what we need to achieve. Camden, it looks like you may have a comment. No? Okay. I know that Commissioner Lair needed a break. And
it's not till 12.
12?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're an hour from now. Okay, perfect.
I was going to comment that what you said is exactly true. The problem is how we mesh this work that has to be done with trying to advance EV chargers as quickly as possible with the demand. So luckily Wendy's going to handle all that for us, but make it all happen. But it's the intersection of these critical pieces. I mean, this will be some of the most important work that the power system takes on for the next generation to prepare us for the future. Unfortunately, parts of the future are happening right now. And so how we make sure we accommodate that, it will be really what measures our success.
Go ahead. Okay. Yeah, I do want to commend you for the presentation. It's incredibly exciting, actually, for me. I know daunting in some ways, but just to see DWP always sort of thinking ahead and knowing how many sort of high-tech industries are interested in LA for those reasons, it's also kind of, very satisfying. I just want to, so that I can get, part of my comment is how we communicate out to the community, the work that you're doing, and parallel to that, on a sort of much more sort of low. I know it's not as heady and high flung and but the water conservation ordinance needs tremendous attention, okay? I mean, I'm getting the kinds of calls I don't expect to get daily, and there's a incredible confusion. Hopefully some of that was, today became clearer as a result of
So, Commissioner, we might want to address that in the context of the Water System Monthly Report,
Yes,
which is going to be under item J on the agenda.
Okay, thank you.
And so I think we have a little more of this presentation to move through. Thank you for that diversion into questioning before you were done. Sir.
Sure, thank you. So just a few more slides. So we do want to talk about, as we look at these transportation electrification programs, we want to make sure that we continue to include assessment and analysis from the perspective of equity and inclusion. And so we partnered up with 7 other utilities. Those utilities include Exelon, Alliance, SMUD, and EPRI, the Electric Power Research Institute, and the Smart Electric Power Alliance, so we can benchmark and have a better way of assessing how our transportation electrification programs are incorporating equity and inclusion. And so what we look to gain from this study is a framework that helps us guide how we develop and implement and evaluate, how we design, evaluate, and implement future transportation electrification programs. Because our job is to bring these loads online, it's also to make sure that it's done in an equitable fashion. So the studies, we're looking to get the results of all this by the end of this year. So future transportation electrification programs will include a lot of this framework and will help us move forward. Wanted to give you a quick update on what we're doing in the area of electric vehicle infrastructure deployment. So our EV infrastructure deployment includes our charger rebates. And so as you can see here from the slide, we've been making some progress. Our public electric vehicle chargers, we have about 49% of those in our underserved communities at the level 2 charging, and we have about 27% of those DC fast chargers in the public in our underserved communities. And as you can see for the non-public chargers, that ratio is not as close. And so what we're looking to do with what we are doing is we've added $1,000 to our initial $1,500 rebates for those customers that are Lifeline or Easy Save customers. So we look to that to help promote and motivate further expansion of the rebates and chargers in these various areas, and we look to see that those numbers increase. And these are where we are now. Part of our current EV rebates, we've also added provisions for nonprofit organizations or 501(c)(3)s to allow prioritization for their EV rebate applications. And we are launching an electronic rebate reservation application that's going to be part of the next tranche of EV rebates starting June 20th. And that's about $18 million for commercial rebates. In that, we have commercial rebates for level 2, DC fast chargers, and mid and heavy duty vehicle rebates as well. In addition to what we're doing with the public and our rebates, we're also doing a lot internally with our EV infrastructure. So we've deployed about 1,000 EV charging stations across our DWP and city facilities. As you can see here, 90 of those are level 2 for public and 15 level 3 public chargers as well. Plus, we continue to look for ways and locations where we can improve that infrastructure. We have about 437 charging locations, both level 2 and level 3, that are currently in design and construction or construction. And we're preparing our facilities for incorporating medium and heavy duty vehicles. And so without this infrastructure in place, we can procure all the vehicles we want, but we won't be able to charge them. So we need to make sure that our facilities are ready for these vehicles. And when you have the fleet update, they'll talk a little bit more about the procurement and what's going, our forecast for these vehicles. I did want to highlight one of our current projects that our EV infrastructure team is working on, and that is the Normandy EV fast charging station. fast charging plaza. And so this facility or this location is a very interesting location for a few reasons. One, it's adjacent to 3 freeways, the 110, the 405, and the 91 freeway. And one requirement for these DC fast charging plazas to be successful is for them to be adjacent to freeways, have freeway access. So it meets that requirement. It's also right next to the Harbor Gateway, so it'll help us facilitate the adoption of the medium and heavy duty vehicles as well. It is in one of our underserved communities, so it would be a great addition and access to those communities. Plus, from a technical perspective, it has overhead 34.5 kV lines, so it facilitates bringing those loads online at that location. And although there is some land preparation that is necessary, the land that exists there is flat, so the minimal land preparation necessary. So the project right now is in the preliminary design phase, and we are looking forward to working with the other agencies to bring this project to fruition. So next, I do want to talk a little bit about the campaigns, the outreach, as we continue to bring these loads online and educate our public. And so we have different campaigns, whether they're through digital, social media, or physical customer bills and newsletters. And we are advertising or promoting the rebate programs. We're also taking it one step further because this the LA100, the EV rebates, it's not just looking at today, although we are very active today, but it's also looking at the future. And so we partnered up with LAUSD to develop a curriculum. We call it Charge into the EV World, and it allows us to educate our youngsters about climate change, green energy, and how it's going to impact them in the future so that they can take that information and hopefully we can build that foundation as we see this generational change occur. So that's the end of my presentation, and if there's any other questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Are there any questions? Then, no, thank you. It's been quite an excellent presentation. I know that you all are constantly being told that we've got to do more and how fast and by when. But I do want to say that what you are doing and what you've done is quite impressive and deserves to be commended. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
I do want to say that I really appreciate the fact that you are sort of partnering with LAUSD, one of the largest landowners in the city, so it's great.
Thank you.
All right. Then we will move to the presentation on hiring from Human Resources.
And we have Michael DeAndrea who's going to do this presentation for us.
Good morning, Commissioners, Madam President. Okay, Michael DeAndrea, Director of Human Resources. I'm very happy to be here this morning to give you a hiring update. We'll talk a little bit about department hiring, but we'll have a particular focus on the power system. So I'm going to touch on 4 things today. First, how LADWP and power system hiring from March 2022, our monthly staffing report, and fiscal year to date to give you a sense of where we are, and then we'll talk quite a bit about where we are heading. We'll talk about briefly about some recent successes, and then we're going to move into skilled craft recruiting, which I know has been a keen interest of this department for some time now. And then finally, I'd like to talk to you about some current work that the general manager and HR have been pursuing with the personnel department on hiring challenges and what we can do to gain greater flexibility and efficiency. Okay. Found it. I know this isn't a difficult piece of technology, but I'd like to advance the slide.
Use the arrow on the keyboard if you need.
Got it. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, these are sections of our monthly staffing report. I know there are a lot of numbers here. I'm not going to go over all of them. There are a few that I'd like to direct your attention to, again, to give you a sense of where we are and then again where we're going to be heading. The underlying theme of these statistics is a gradual and sustained upward trend, which I will point out for you. There are also some clear realities of the way that we hire. LADWP and Power are hiring more as we come out of the pandemic. A substantial percentage of our hiring is internal. I think you've heard us use this phrase before. That means a lot of the hiring activity pertains to our employees who are promoting off of civil service exams or moving to other divisions and systems in their current classification. All good. It's a great benefit for our system for employees. Does, however, make it difficult to move up quickly in our net hire category. Our attrition, like many organizations, is noteworthy. And so I'll direct your attention to the top of this chart. You can see for Power, we are currently at about 83% of our annual personnel resolution. So we're at 83%. The department as a whole also happens to be at 83%. If we look at the monthly Power activity in the middle of the screen, you'll see that the total hires for the month of March were 65. But I want to note that 41 were internal, which is 63%. 24 of those 65 hires were external, or what we refer to as new hires to the department. 37%. And I think the last thing we need to keep in mind here is the attrition. We had for the month we had 19, which is 29%. So what that means, if you move to the right of that section, is that we had 5 net new employees for the month. Doesn't sound like a huge number, and it does. To be frank, it does belie a great deal of hiring activity on the part of the Power system and HR and assistants. For the fiscal year to date, the same kinds of issues pertain. We had 1,040 hires, 753 were internal, 287 were external, with 218 attrition. We netted 69 new hires in the Power system fiscal year to date. So that's sort of our reality. Thank you. Thank you, Reggie. He gave me the really easy one. My wingman.
Can always count on Reggie.
Indeed, we can. Okay, so notwithstanding this reality, Power understands fully the need to increase our rate of hiring, both from an operational needs perspective, as well as the near future demands resulting from the strategic long-term resource plan and the LA 100 transformation that all of you were just discussing. Of course, Power and HR have understood this board's urging to accelerate hiring wherever possible. I just would mention to that end, for the quarter ending March 2022, Power submitted 43 civil service certification requests for 179 vacancies. And fiscal year to date, January 22 through March 2022, 51% of all DWP civil service certification appointments were made in the Power system. So I'll just finish with the statistics by saying that the Power system and HR are working together every day. Power is pursuing changes in operations that permit larger and more frequent training classes. And HR is working very, very diligently on initiatives with the personnel department for more efficient hiring and greater flexibility, which I will speak a little bit more about in detail in just a few moments. Okay. This slide simply shows the department's trend. You can see from March of 2022, at the beginning of the pandemic, obviously we began a downward trend and we went from 10,730 to 10,511. But you can see we have been moving our way up very steadily, currently at 10,751. For the Power system, Likewise, beginning of the pandemic, March 2020, they were at 5293. They lost about 150 positions, even though they continued their operations in the same manner at 5146, and they've climbed back up to 5257. Okay, let me move on to some noteworthy hires in the power system. This board has noted clearly in the past that they were somewhat concerned about the lack of a single trainee in our line series training program, electric distribution mechanic. Happy to report that in the March class, which was a class of 20, I believe, we do have a female trainee who is on board and working in the system. For the electrical mechanic class, we have, in a class of 15, we have 2 female electrical mechanic trainees who have joined the team. So not huge numbers, we know that, but it's a place to start, and we intend to improve on those numbers as well. Okay. This slide refers to a chart that we received from the personnel department in our quarterly dashboard meetings with them. Last year, I asked the personnel department to create a tool for us to be able to gauge and monitor all of our robust recruitment activities in the community. And what I did that because I realized no matter how hard we work in the community, if those efforts do not result in civil service applications, we haven't achieved anything, because that's the way you get a job at DWP, is by filing a civil service application. So what we receive every quarter is this enormous chart, far too large to put on this screen. These are just some examples of what is on that chart. So it's gender and ethnicity to total applications received. We've asked them to give us 12 classifications tracked in the power, water, and joint system. When we first started our skilled craft recruitment efforts, we really focused on 4 or 5 of our primary skilled craft classifications. And I think we realized that that was insufficient. I think we know that if we are going to achieve significant improvement in female representation in the skilled craft classes, it has to be in a broad array of classifications. So we have 12 that we track here. It shows us the most recent exam administration versus applications received in the previous. It shows us male, female, non-binary, and EEO ethnicities. And just below here, this is just a sampling of some of the data that we received. So for example, you can see for EDM, electric distribution mechanic, for the 2021 administration, we had 2 female applications. In 2022, we had 8. It's an improvement. And we also had 8 African-American applications for candidates, which was 5%. And then for the 2022 administration, we had 22. And so on and so forth. So that's a very important tool for us to use to gauge how successful we are being in the community. Let me talk a little bit about skilled craft recruitment. This is a chart that simply shows from February of 2022 to June of 2022, the skilled craft recruitment events that we have conducted in the community. It shows you the type of event, career fairs, employee engagement, presentations, and some training. Gives you the number and the number of attendees, and then those that are up and coming as well. So we have 17 events. We have doubled the size of our recruitment team over the past year. We used to have a dedicated engineering recruitment team. We now have a dedicated skilled craft team working very closely with power and water. And I would like to talk to you about all 17. I will not, but I just picked out a few. On February 22nd, we were at the Empowerment Congress West Board in South Los Angeles. This was a neighborhood council presentation on LADWP job opportunities and how to apply. That's sort of a hallmark characteristic of our events. We talk about various jobs, specifically those that are either open for filing or those that will very soon be open for filing, and how to apply. We were in the Owens Valley Virtual Job Fair. At the end of March, we were at the winter class presentation in East Los Angeles, and this was a particularly gratifying event because during the pandemic, winter essentially stopped their operations, so they're back up and running. This was great because at the winter class presentation, staff tells me a young lady came up to them who had a particular interest in water treatment. She actually had the required class licenses. We helped her right there on the spot fill out her application. She's taking the test.
And could you tell me what winter means?
Yes,
Just
I'm sorry.
because-
It is women in non-traditional employment roles. They have a strong focus, Madam President, on construction skills. They historically are in East LA. Staff told me just this morning they've actually moved to Commerce, but we work with them regularly. It's an outstanding organization. At the end of March, we were at the Polytechnic High School job fair in Sun Valley, focusing on skilled craft, filling out applications and so forth. May 14th, of course, we have the Lineman's Rodeo. HR has been working with communications and power quite hard. We're going to have several booths at the Lineman's Rodeo talking about various job bulletins, how to fill out applications, and so forth. And lastly, we have in May, the Greater Los Angeles Veterans Job Fair. That's in addition to Fleet Week. We are recruiting for load dispatcher, amongst other classes, for transitioning military candidates. We have found that military candidates tend to be excellent candidates for a variety of classifications here at DWP, both in the water system and the power system. Okay. The last thing I want to talk to you about is the hiring challenges that we have been discussing internally, both with power system, water system, and IBEW, and more recently, specifically with the personnel department. And there are 4 hiring challenges that we are working to overcome. I'll go through them briefly. The first one on the left of your screen talks about making exams which are currently open and promotional, open only. And what that means is the charter has a provision, 1009, which provides existing city employees with a priority. That's the way it has been for many, many years. And that is fine in many cases. We have found at DWP that provision can be a hindrance, especially for our skilled craft classifications. One of the exams that we recently sent down is the UDCM, Underground Distribution Construction Mechanic. They have been struggling for quite some time in filling entire classes. And the reason is because due to Charter Section 1009, they are obligated to look at promotional candidates first. We hire many outstanding promotional candidates. Promotional candidates, though, have the ability to go back to their old position with protective leave. It's a wonderful thing for an employee, sometimes not so great for operations. And what we end up with in this physically demanding job is classes that are not quite full. And that's a hardship. So we're asking the personnel department to make that exam open only, which simply means we can hire from the open ranks, people brand new, or the promotional ranks on a level playing field. We'd like to do the same thing on the power side with our line series, electric distribution mechanic, for a lot of the same reasons. We do get to the open ranks for the EDM exam fairly often. The problem is when we are obligated to look at promotional candidates first and we come up short in a class, it has a significant impact on the crews out in the community. You have to remember that an electric distribution mechanic is a 4-year temporary training period. The cost to put someone through the 4-year training period is just under $1 million each. And so when we come up short in that class, we feel it. And so we're asking the personnel department to make both of those exams, and very likely in the near future, others open only, to make our hiring more efficient. The second thing we are proposing to them is to make some of our classes, our common broad classes, electrical craft helper and maintenance and construction helper, to make those DWP specific. Briefly stated, our ECHs and MCHs do very unique work at DWP. It's somewhat different from their counterparts in the city. And so because we do unique work, we would like to be able to create, to assist and have examinations that focus on our specific skills. Third, we would like the Personnel Department to limit the application of Civil Service Rule 4.2, which essentially means that the Personnel Department does not necessarily have to allow everybody who qualifies to take an exam. And they do this because at times they can get thousands and thousands of applications. The problem with it is that it can have a limiting, discouraging effect on our recruitment efforts. And so we're working with the Personnel Department on ways to limit or not apply that for some of our skilled craft classes. Lastly, we do, when we go out and recruit in the community for engineering associates, we do same-day job offers, which is something that is offered and sanctioned by the Personnel Department, and it allows us to make an offer right there on the spot, which is great when we are competing with other companies that don't have civil service hiring. Now, there's still some process afterwards, but it says to that stellar candidate, we are offering you a job right here. It makes a huge difference. We've done that for many years with engineering associates. We'd like to do it with our line series as well. When we go up north to the Northwest Lyman College, and even here at LA Trade Tech, when we recruit for new trainees in the line series, we're competing with other utilities who are at those same career fairs, and we need to be able to have this tool. So those are things that the general manager and I met with the outgoing Personnel Department GM in January, and then more recently with the brand new Personnel Department GM. It was a very encouraging and positive meeting. They seem open to understanding how unique DWP is and allowing us to move forward with these initiatives. That's what I have for you. I'm more than happy to answer any questions.
If I could add one thing to what Michael said. So we did have a very positive response from personnel. They will need to submit to their commission to get approval on a couple of these items, which they are preparing to do. So I expect that that'll help us. And again, the whole purpose is to make sure that we're able to reach the best possible candidates, including the ones that we're recruiting, people who've worked here for us as daily rate workers, people who've gone through the effort of passing electrical classes that we make available, reach those people and be able to hire them. And we think that that'll improve our success rate of candidates that we bring in. So.
I should also add that our utility pre-craft trainees, which is our own exempt class here at DWP, although they're exempt employees, and many of them are here with us for quite some time, they file open. So that restriction puts them at a disadvantage, and we have communicated that to personnel.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Mr. Wilbur, any additional comments, or are we good?
I think we're good. I don't know if I can accentuate any more the fact that when we go to these events and we specifically recruit people, other utilities are there offering them a job instantly into their apprenticeship program, and we're offering them an opportunity in 6 months to take a test and sit on a list and wait, and whether or not they get accepted because of Rule 4.2 or whether or not they are stuck on an open list when they're hiring promotional. So we don't really have a good offer to make. So that is a big point to make, specifically for that classification.
No, I do recognize that these are critical and material changes that will have significant impact on our ability to compete in the job market. And these efforts, along with others, should go a long way in increasing our ability to move the needle on the percentage of folks that we're able to bring in and help to beat, in terms of new hires, that ever-present number of retirees, which is something that we are combating all the time and that is not going to change. So we've got to change on the positive side to have impact. Appreciate the outreach at Winter, and in particular seeing that we've got, as you said, not a large number, but it is a start. and also very much appreciate seeing it laid out. What we measure, we can achieve, and so it's just critical that we keep these numbers front and center so that we can make progress. Any additional questions or comments from members of the board?
No, I just want to thank you for the presentation. I think it was very thorough, very encouraging, and flexibility is actually, you always think of some DWP being able to demonstrate some flexibility in the way they operate. And I remember the testimonial from the First Lady. Remember the First Lady who presented about a year and a half or two ago?
Yes.
And I promised her she was going to meet the First Lady. I didn't know there was going to be COVID and a war, but it's going to happen. So
Thank you,
the
Commissioner.
two First Ladies will have a photo at some point.
Thank you. We're happy to report back anytime.
Okay, thank you so very much, and we will keep an eye on all of this. We have both a presentation from internal audit and a presentation regarding the budget. I'd like to defer the presentation on internal audit and move forward with the presentation regarding the budget, just in the interest of time.
That would be fine, Board President. For the budget, I do have Marianne Ann's, our director from the Budget Office, and Elizabeth Azret, the Assistant Director, to do the proposed final budget presentation. Okay.
Thank you, Ann. I think you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes. Good morning, Madam President and Commissioners. I'm Marianne Ann's, the Director of Budget System Replacement, and the Customer Service Division. And I want to thank you for the opportunity today to present the Department's 22-23 proposed final budget. Today's presentation, I'm going to cover, I'm trying to be, hopefully you will find it fairly concise and informative. I know our preliminary budget had extended for the prelim in March, so we're trying to be mindful of kind of condensing it and cutting to the chase with today's presentation. So I'll give you a major change overview between the prelim and the final, followed by a final budget overview at the senior AGM and the GM direct report level. I will introduce Elizabeth Azret. She'll be covering the labor slides, and then I will follow and conclude with the water, power, and joint systems at the cost element breakdown, and then followed with the more programmatic at the revenue fund level. With that, there was a $71 million net increase between the prelim and the final budget. Mainly, the main contributors, $40 million increase. This was attributed to the adding of 195 positions to the GM Labor Planning Organization. There was also a function of reducing the division's vacancy factor from 75% down to 0. So fully funded positions at the discretion of the general manager to transfer to various operating organizations as the business needs arise. The next item is about a $36 million increase in the non-labor escalation rates. These were revised from 3.5% to 5.1%, and this was based on the 2021 fourth quarter UCLA latest forecast that we had at the time. The next item was the fuel and purchase power expense that increased $20 million from the prelim budget, and that is largely attributed to the forecasted gas price increases, as well as a change in the debt service in the Intermountain Power Project. The second to the last item is for power system. It was a $17 million net increase, largely due to labor. This was a function of the Power Exec Organization 70. Their vacancy factor reduced from 35% to 16%. There were also positions that were moved across divisions within the power system from a higher to a lower vacancy factor, so they gained a little bit more funding as well. And lastly, about a $2 million increase in the exempt labor budget, resulting in a net $17 million for power system. These increases were offset by a $42 million reduction in the healthcare cost projection that was based on the latest AON. The final budget overview. This slide provides the department's final budget by senior AGM and the GM direct reports. Now, while the change between the prelim and final was a $71 million increase, a 0.9% increase, please note the level of growth that is planned for the budget in comparing the latest completed fiscal year 2021 spending of $6,959 million compared to the 21-22 re-estimate of $7,319. That's a $366 million increase in planned spending by the end of this fiscal year. This is going to be followed by what's projected as a $606 million increase in planned spending when you compare the 22 re-estimate of 7319 to the 22-23 program year of 7925. The notable increases at a high level, and then I will cover the more granular at the cost element later in the presentation. For power system, the increase from 21 completed fiscal year to 22 is about a $100 million increase, followed by a $200 million increase from the current year to the program year. Water system has a planned $103 million increase from the 21 compared to the 22 program, current year projection, followed by a $76 million increase between 22 and 23. And then the joint system is projected at $157 million between the last completed year of 21 compared to 22's re-estimate, followed by a $331 million increase between 22 and 23. I'll cover, as I mentioned, by cost element as well as the program FI drivers in the later part of the presentation. And next, I'd like to turn over the presentation to Elizabeth Asrat, our Assistant Division Director, to cover the labor slides.
So I'm just really quickly, you've got General Manager and other direct reports with a 65% increase, proposed final versus prelim. And could you just run back again what that represents?
Sure, that represents largely the additional of 195 new positions that are added into the GM's labor planning organization. And those are essentially for the general manager to transfer to various operating organizations as needs arise once we begin the next fiscal year. And so that's the large driver in that organization.
Okay.
Elizabeth, would you like to cover the next few slides?
Yes, good morning.
Just, in the labor management pool, is it determined what precisely those positions are, or is it, how is it determined, how did you arrive at the number of positions, and how does that made up?
Actually, Elizabeth will be covering in the next few slides some of the granularity across the divisions. And for the GM's planning org, we use I think it's senior electric mechanic as our kind of placeholder, if you will, of positions. And then when they're transferred to the various operating organizations, they get to determine what specific classifications they need for their operations.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Sure.
Good morning. And thank you, Marianne. In this slide, we will show the 22-23 proposed final APR of 13,456, which is a 467 position increase from the current year APR of 12,089. And after applying a vacancy factor, the proposed budget include a 12,199 position that shows on the green line. And as of March 2022, the department occupancy is 10,768 position, which is reflected on the red line of the slide. So compared to the proposed APR, the department have over 2,688 vacant position to fill. And if we compare it with the funding position, we have 1,431 vacant position to fill. So on the next slide, this slide will reflect more in detail the additional position added for the proposed 22-23 final budget, the 467. The first column, it shows the addition that we did during the preliminary budget and presented to the board back in March. That includes 272 positions. The second column reflects 195 positions that were added since March. So to highlight the major addition that we have for this proposed budget is 168 positions added for customer service, 90 positions for IT services, and as Marianne mentioned, 195 positions added for labor planning. And since then, 25 has been transferred to different divisions. So in total, there will be a remaining 223 positions available to the general manager to allocate to different divisions as needed. So the total number of positions are under a specific class code. That's really general class code. But as we transfer the position, for example, if it's transferred for Inspector General and the class code that they need the classification is a different position, then they will be able to swap them to the desired class. So based on the total APR and the funding headcount, I just like to note some of the significant headroom that we have for growth. Power system has 1,077 headrooms. That is, if we compare the 5,898 APR versus the 4,821 occupancy as of March. Water system will have 341 positions. And in joint system, external and regulatory affairs will have 411 positions. Corporate services, 228, and IT services, 232 headroom for growth. Next slide. So this slide reflects the total dollar amount that we're proposing for fiscal year 22-23 for labor, overtime, and benefit. The total amount is $2.4 billion, which is a net increase of $20 million from what we presented back in the preliminary budget. So labor cost will be $1,545.5 million, which is a $61.7 million increases because of the additional position that we added and some of the adjustment in the vacancy factor. Overtime is $291.5 million, and benefits, which include retirement death benefit and healthcare cost, is $587.7 million, which is close to $42 million reduction because of updated healthcare projection that we received back in February. Next slide. So in addition to the budgeted APR position, power system has additional funding for exempt daily laborer and the utility pre-craft trainee, which is a total of $53.1 million, $48.4 million for labor, and $4.7 million for overtime. This is close to $2.4 million increase from the preliminary budget. So on April 7, 2022, there were 123 utility pre-craft trainee and additional 450 different exempt daily.
You'll have to speak up. I'm losing your voice. It gets softer and softer as you. Thank you.
Just to go back a little bit, in addition to the APR position power system they have additional funding, $53.1 million additional funding for exempt daily labor and utility pre-craft. And this is a minimum increase, a $2.4 million increase from what we presented back in the preliminary budget. And with that, I send it back to Marianne to cover the remaining of the presentation.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So this slide depicts the power systems budget by cost element. And I'd like to just highlight that the planned growth between 21 and 22 is about a $100 million increase from $3,278 to $3,378. And this is largely driven, as you can see, between the fuel and purchase power and emission expenses. Those are an increase of 152 million, and then also followed by the labor funding increases of 10 million as they grow and expand the organization, as well as fleet purchases of about 9 million. And then when we move to the following year, between 22 and 23, there's a $200 million increase from the 3378 to the 3578. And this is largely driven as a function of the contract spending. So you can see there's a $228 million increase in planned growth in contract spend, followed by about a $49 million increase in regular labor and overtime spend, followed by the fleet purchases of $47 million. A significant factor in water systems growth between the prelim and the final is about a $39 million increase, and that's largely attributed to the water conservation organization moving out of customer services, so out of the joint system, into the water system. And that resulted in about a $17 million increase in, you'll see the incentives and the rebates and the other direct incentive fees. You see the 70% increase. That's because of the movement of the organization underwater, as well as a $13 million increase in the contract spend for trunk line work and the Mulholland fountain renovation, just to name a few. I also want to note that the water system is expecting to spend about $103 million from the last closed fiscal year 21 to 22, and that's largely driven by contract spending of about $66 million increase, followed by the purchase water, 18 million, and then labor of 14 million. There's about a $76 million increase in spending growth between 22 and 23, again, attributed to the contracts of 73 million, the incentives of 26, and then labor of 20 million. While there's a reduction of 17 million in the joint organization system between the prelim and the final, again, and that is largely due to the healthcare cost projections coming in lower, as well as the incentives reduction due to the movement of water conservation out of customer services and into water systems. So you'll be seeing that. That's some of the drivers of the reductions here. There is substantial growth in spending for the joint system. Between 21 and 22, there's $158 million, and that's largely due to contract spending, the bond redemption and interest increases, as well as labor. And then between 22 and 23, there's a $331 million planned growth, and again, it follows the same, and you can see the contracts increasing about $165 million. The bond redemption and interest increasing $93 million, labor growing to by $91 million, followed by the materials and supplies, and that's typically for the hardware, software is a large driver of that, of $43 million. From this perspective, this is the Power Revenue Fund. This chart depicts the capital expenditures trend. And while there's a proposed $30 million increase from the prelim to the final, largely due to infrastructure and reliability, there is substantial growth again between 22 and 23, and you can see that it's a $372 million increase. So when we compare the $1,374,000,000, that's where we're estimated to close this fiscal year, to the program year of $1,746,000,000. The large drivers that I just want to bring to your attention and note is the green bar, which is the operating support that is growing from 192 to 356, $164 million increase. And those drivers on the capital revenue side is the JFB remodel, as well as the fleet. There's also energy storage at the LA Zoo, utility-built solar, the ERP, as well as the customer service center capital upgrade. Those are the main drivers on the joint system, which is the operating support. The other notable one is the purple bar for the infrastructure, which is going from 388 million to 476 million, an $88 million increase, and that's a large function of the interagency and customer initiatives. Those are also construction of the RSX serving LAX, as well as the PCM capital facility improvements. The also notable item is the demolition of the old units of the Valley Generating Station are included in that. And lastly, the construction of a distributing station for training purposes. So those are some of the highlights on the capital fund on the power side. On the O&M, operation and maintenance expenditures trend, this is a steady growth from the 21 fiscal year of $1,298,000,000 to $1,384,000,000 in 2022 and projected $1,483,000,000 in 2023. The notable increases are attributed to is about $99 million, and they're driven by the operating support, and that's the green bar you see, $499 million growing to $560 million. That's a $61 million shift. And those are the main drivers of that is cybersecurity, corporate, administrative, and general expenses. Those are some of the function of those additional positions that were added. As well as the electric transportation. This is the low carbon fuel standard. So that's an increase in funding attributed there, as well as the orange bar, which is the Power System Reliability Program going from $469 to $491, a $22 million increase, and that's largely in distribution O&M. A few highlights just to note on the Power's financial plan summary. For 22-23, the projected sales is 20,635 gigawatt hours. This is a slight decrease from the prelim due to energy efficiency savings. This results in a revenue requirement of $4,498,000,000. The O&M we talked about earlier, $1,483,000,000. Fuel, $1.5 billion, depreciation and taxes of $830 million, of total operating expenses of $3,831,000,000. The change in net position is $312 million. It's an $85 million increase from the prelim budget, with a system average rate of 20.8 cents per kilowatt hour. There is no planned borrowing for the program year, as there is substantial planned borrowing for the current year is re-estimated at $1,298,000,000. For the Water Revenues Fund capital expenditure trend, there's a proposed $15 million increase between the prelim and the final, and that's largely due to infrastructure and water quality for groundwater remediation efforts. There's a substantial growth between 22 and 23 in the amount of $128 million. And that's largely due to the operating support, which is the purple bar, that's 71 million growing to 129. And this is a function of the water shares of the joint capital, the new office space, customer services, capital upgrades that I mentioned on the power side. Water pays their share through this, the fleet equipment and ERP. It's also followed by the water supply growth, which is the blue bar. That's a $53 million increase, and that's largely due to the watershed stormwater capture and water conservation, followed by infrastructure, which is the red bar going from 396 to 435. It's a $39 million increase, mainly into the reservoir improvements and pump stations. The operation and maintenance expenditure trend reflects a $29 million increase from 21 to 22, and that's again due to operating support. That's the corporate A&G, as well as direct legal services and customer services, as well as water quality. There's also an $80 million projected spend and between 22 and 23, and those are coming from water quality, 34 million, operating support of 24 million, and then water supply by 19 million. For a few highlights of the Water Revenue Fund's financial plan summary, this includes sales forecast of 199 million cubic feet. The revenue requirement is $1,598,000,000. Their operating expenses are $1,187,000,000, and the change in net positions $379 million. The system average proposed rate is $7.90 per HCF, and they have planned borrowing of $507 million to support the $1 billion capital plan. So today we're requesting this honorable board's approval of the 22-23 final budget, after which we will transmit and forward to the city. And next month, the next few slides, these just depict in June, FSO will be seeking your approval for the quarterly power pass-through adjustment factors for the energy cost adjustment, the reliability cost adjustment, as well as the base rate revenue target. And every quarter thereafter, we'll be seeking the energy cost adjustment factors. And on the water side, in June, we'll be seeking the base rate revenue target approval, and then back in September for the semi-annual factors. This concludes the presentation, and I'd be happy to take up any questions that you might have.
Okay, thank you. We are going to take a short break before moving into questions on this presentation and also comments from the ratepayer advocate with respect to either the presentation or, again, you're also free to comment when we take up the items themselves. So,
and I will have a short presentation for that.
Thank you. We'll be breaking now, back in 30 minutes.
30 minutes.
Current recess.
I can use the bathroom.
The little things in life that bring us closer, you know.
So I just have to let you in on my little chuckle, which is this idea that dedicated staff for the ED people is going to sleep. The reason I want you to know how funny this is to me is that Susan Rugani came to us because she couldn't get the contract NOCs on the trunk lines. So then they moved people out of main line to trunk line, got the NOCs.
Kevin, your mic's hot.
Yeah, your mics are still on.
We are still on air, folks. It's still live. Yeah.
car if necessary.
If I can, it's after my
Madam President,
dad and nephew's.
we are recording.
The meeting, Mr. Adams. The meeting is started. Thank you. We will go to the to Miss Yu. Jennifer, if you would please call the roll. And also, I neglected to advise this morning that our acting board secretary is Jennifer Hugh. I think her first time on her own at the desk in the primary seat and doing an amazing job. So thank you. Please call the roll.
Thank you. Board President McCLAIN-HILL.
Present.
Commissioner Brad Hopkins.
Present.
Commissioner LEHRER.
Present.
3 members and a quorum.
Thank you. Mr. Brejevich, I assume that your admonitions earlier continue in place. You have nothing else to say before we move forward?
Nothing to add, Commissioner. Thank you.
Thank you. We just completed the presentation of the budget and are back to take questions and also to determine if there are any other comments with respect to the budget. So we'll start with commissioners. Are there any questions? I don't hear any questions. I have a couple of things I'm just curious about. I assume that somewhere buried in, or not buried, but built into the budget, there are all of the positions necessary to start the camera program?
Which program? I'm sorry.
Oh, camera.
Camera.
It's the program that supports businesses who hire we have.
No. This is the program that would, they've changed the name a couple of times, but this is the program that allows for the deep retrofit.
Right.
So maybe you think of it from the business perspective. I'm just thinking of it from the perspective of multifamily housing.
Right.
And that would facilitate the deep retrofit and weatherization, solar, and other kinds of energy efficiency measures with respect to multifamily housing. And I'm curious as to, I just want to make sure that those resources are in the current budget. Is that right?
Board President, there's $173 million in the energy efficiency budget, and if more positions are needed, we could ask the general manager from his planning organization to bring more positions in.
And we did not have a conversation about that because when the HR presentation was online, but I know that program required additional staffing in energy efficiency, both with respect to the engineers and also might require some additional staffing. I'm not certain about that, but I'm anxious to see it get going. And I'm looking forward to hearing about it. I think we'll ask to have something more formal presented. In addition, I would assume that there are sufficient resources, and I know this is little things, like this is less than a rounding error in our budget, but I did want to underscore the department's not only interest in stepping up and helping to support our residents as we take on the drought, but also focusing more resources and an equivalent amount of attention on how we help neighborhoods deal with things related to extreme heat. And so while that wasn't specifically called out anywhere, I assume that we've accounted for those efforts as well. Is that right, Marty?
Yes, there's funding there, and usually those kind of funds hit somewhere under the water and energy efficiency programs, and there's, as Ann says, ample funding, and we have increased staffing there and can increase staffing further if we need to.
Okay, no, I very much appreciate that. That's critically important that we be able to, to touch our customers where they are, and that we, as we are planning for all of the long-term efforts that are necessary to address climate change, that we are equally aggressive meeting people today with the challenges that they face today. And often that's a lot more low-tech. But just eager to see that happening.
And if I could comment on that, so the weatherization program, so that we have increased the budget and the number of people in that program. That was slowed down just because of getting people into individual homes during COVID. So, but we were prepared to ramp that up, and that'll go directly to low-income customers. And again, it's low-tech, big fix. You know, it'll make a big impact. In Camera, I believe that launched a month plus ago, and we'll get you a report on that. And so, and we did have commitments to staff up for that as well, in doing that. I think the positions have already crossed my desk. So,
I want to bring up schools and streets as part of a parallel conversation to what you're talking about. I think that that the LAUSD is with the new superintendent is eager to be collaborating with DWP. I'm on the LABC board, and he came and talked to us. If you haven't met him yet, he's an incredibly dynamic person. He really wants to make a difference. He's mortified at sort of what some of the students have to go through, how hot, how little. It's an asphalt jungle, and we've known that for a while. And in that they are one of the largest tenant in the city. It would be great to have a real collaboration ongoing. And I think there are a lot of professional groups that want to participate in a meaningful way. And the same thing goes for street trees, to your point, and that is that a lot of the trees are not irrigated, correct? So whether it's water trucks or whether it's, trying to figure out community level purple pipe water, I don't know what the solution is, but I'm worried.
Well, I look forward to collaborating with you as we put together, I think, a more formal presentation regarding extreme heat and some of the strategies that we can use to address that issue, particularly in underserved communities. Bringing forward both internal and external resources to really think about how the department can be a leader in that area. And I know the general manager is very interested in doing more there as well. So, we will get that up before July. So in the next couple of meetings, assuming that we can corral people to attend, to be present, but certainly no later than a meeting in July, because this is very imminent, pressing, and I think deserves our attention right now.
And know what we can do that'll maybe kind of give a good kickoff point for that. We've been talking about street trees and issues, and watering is definitely an issue. Some of the council offices have experienced a lot of costs and stuff associated. So, and the LAUSD, we've had a couple long-term programs. We finished the first 3-year program. We have another one that we're funding. A lot has to do with bathroom retrofits, drinking fountain retrofits, solar charging, AC retrofits. What I can do is to give the board a head start. We'll prepare a couple board letters just to give the information on what's going on now, so that when we do have a discussion, you'll have that background already, and that'll be able to give everybody a good starting point to talk from. And then that'll hopefully help generate some ideas of how we can tackle these issues.
Absolutely. We look forward to working with our staff as well as we generate this presentation.
And I just want to bring up one other sort of detail, but interesting. In New Orleans and in many of the in areas of the country where there's actually been different problems, emergency hubs became a way of the future. And we did find during COVID that at the beginning of COVID, a lot of people spent time in libraries. And now there's been several, UCLA and other student groups have done interesting studies on how we could have emergency hubs. It would be in potentially DWP facilities, but also in schools, where you have a place where you can go during an emergency to get help. And it's, tangible help, or it's, basically, other kind of help on how to deal with all the issues that you have to deal with. And it's location-based. And you can do them, in schools. and you can do them in DWP facilities that might have extra space. So,
With respect, thank you. With respect to the budget, first, I'm sorry, Commissioner Barad, did you have any comment on the budget before we move on to other comments?
No, but I agree certainly with Commissioner Lair that I think that the hub is really very, very important, and especially, you know, in that part of the of LA where it is really hot, and there are lots of DWP facilities that I think have some extra room.
No, thank you for that. Thank you both. Again, I think as we consider the impacts of climate change and in particular the potential deadly threat of extreme heat, it does behoove us to spend some quality time at this board, perhaps with just a single focus for that board meeting, looking at how addressing those issues intersect with the work that we're doing and how we can be of service to our communities around climate change, around extreme heat, both as it relates to the implications for things on the power side, but also as it relates to the water system as well. So I look forward to working with all of you on that. Any comments on the budget from the ratepayer advocate? Dr.
Yes,
Pickle.
I have a short presentation on that. Next slide. DWP, as they cite in their reports, has threaded the needle on this budget, given the conflicts between infrastructure requirements, complying with regulatory mandates, providing exemplary customer service, all the while trying to maintain cost control to keep rates down. Policy and industry changes require more investment broadly, and we want to take a look at how we did last year, this year, and might do next year, and we have some recommendations on this. Next slide. We have new economic uncertainties driven by the pandemic and the gyrations of geopolitics, especially things affecting the energy markets. We have operational challenges that are also created by the pandemic and geopolitics and are affecting materials replacements, parts replacements, and utility industry changes. There are major impacts on these things on fuel prices, interest rates and inflation, equipment availability, customer EV conservation, and behind-the-meter solar choices. Next slide. And we have existing policy initiatives, climate change imperatives that are recommending 20-year investments of roughly 60 to roughly 90 billion or more. Water supplies are at risk from drought and worsened by climate change, with alternatives costing likely over 20 billion over the next 20 to 30-year period. At the same time, we have low-income and lifeline discounts on rates that are unchanged in an era of increased need. And we have long-deferred investment in IT systems, along with distribution systems and transmission systems in both water and power that need repair. The 2016 rate case, which was our last comprehensive rate case, proposed rates to cover what was perceived to be the minimum necessary to maintain the system. And we're not achieving some of the key goals set in the 2016 rate. Combined transmission and distribution, water distribution capital plans are lagging their 2015-16 rate case plans. And the Power System Reliability Program, while it's been achieving the desired spending levels, costs have been higher. They planned a lot of cost reduction in some areas, but they haven't been able to achieve those unit cost reductions. So that, for example, the total number of pole replacements are below what was in early expectations. And last but not least, we have IT investment that lags needs. Next chart. Questions. How successful were we in stepping up our spending that was included in the revised budget last year? And then second, how well have we done in performing versus the approved budget for 2021-22? And note that the approved budget included an additional $300 million in compensation costs, illustrated by the funded headcount shown at slide 4 of the proposed final budget presentation that was just given. How are we going to do accomplishing the goals of 22-23? Next slide. This slide takes the information off of slide 3 that was in the proposed budget. The first question is, versus 2021, 21, last fiscal year, how did we do this fiscal year in terms of the estimates of how we can get by year end? In power system, we stepped up our combined capital and operating spending by 3.1%. Excuse me, these numbers are so small, I'm having a hard time reading them. And 9.5% in the water system. Joint system stepped up 6.1%, with a total step up in terms of what was accomplished by 5.3%. Our ambitions were bigger. If you look at the approved budget versus how well we performed on that, we we fell short on that by 1.7% in power and excuse me, by 7%. The water side did achieve 9% in that area, and the joint system was below by 11%. So what can we learn out of this? If we look at the final box in the step up between the re-estimate of what we've done in 2022-23, or want to do a 22-23, and the re-estimate number of 2021-22, we're asking DWP to step up by 5.9% in power, 6.4% in water, 12% in the joint system, for a total of 8.3% in the final budget. Given the performance last year of percentage increases that have been substantially below that for every area except for water, I think stepping up will be a problem. So next slide. There are other problems that will make stepping up hard. The current estimate on general inflation, the GDP implicit price deflator, as of April 1, inflation was estimated at 8%. Now, that's a preliminary number. It'll likely differ, but 8% is bigger than we've had in more than several decades. Fuel prices are up sharply. The good news is DWP has filled most of its fuel needs by hedging, which stabilizes the prices for a multi-year period, but eventually payment will come due. Power investment in this particular financial plan is all cash funded, with no new money issues planned in 22-23. Relying on 100% pay-go is unusual. The goal of maintaining the current system average rate is probably unattainable given inflation and energy prices. the concern is trying to maintain that may result in further reduced O&M and capital investment needed for maintaining and enhancing the system. Next slide. Further challenges. As I noted at the beginning, the budget attempts to thread the narrow path of what might be possible. And some of the good news is about 67% of the water rates and 50% of the power rates are pass-throughs. But those aren't all components, and a number of components have had to be cut. If you want to see the examples of areas that have been cut, look at the appendix slide, page 22. This is an important slide in the DWP board presentation. Slide 22 shows things that had to be removed to achieve the price limitation goals. Spending is likely to be less than budget in key areas. And last but not least, DWP's existing rates are now significantly outdated, especially in power. So we're in a crying need for a rate review on water and power rates. Next slide. Recommendations. These are short-term. These are intended to look at how DWP can ramp up its spending to meet increased needs. The EV presentation was certainly a stark reminder of the investment area, additional investment needs, because we have an obligation to serve, and additional EV loads may stretch that ability, or growing EV loads may stretch that ability. We're asking on or before January, DWP should report back on the 21-22 final actual performance versus budgeted. The numbers we're working with are estimates. Deferred investment in power transmission and distribution typically starts creating problems in 5 to 8 years. So we have to watch our performance there. Increased customer adoption of EVs and home solar may accelerate this risk. And DWP should report back on achieving the increased investment in key water and power transmission and distribution infrastructure, in concert with the policy goals. By February, that's on or before February, DWP should report back on the financial requirements for achieving these investment goals and the trade-offs necessary for achieving these goals. If and when certainly compromises will have to be made. Those are the end of my comments.
Okay. Are there any questions to the to Dr. Pickle?
I have a question. I believe it was slide 7 or 8 where you talked about let's see. Okay, there it is in the third bullet. Relying 100% on pay-go is unusual. I wonder if you could explain that a little more.
Pay-go is the industry term, financial term, for one of your two sources of cash for running your system, other than the customers. You can take out debt, or you can use cash balances from prior years or the current year. So that's paying as you go. And it's unusual for DWP to rely 100% on paying as you go, but that is what the power budget includes this year.
Would that mean that a power source gets a bill and then pays it right then and there?
No, this is financing DWP. This is how DWP is financed, rather than how the customers are paying their individual bills.
And for the last 2 fiscal years, we have issued all of the bonds that were part of the approved budget, and we've seen higher wholesale revenues. So we're thinking this year we can operate the system without issuing more debt.
Yeah, thank you for that. I was simply going to say, Dr. Pickle, you've made a lot of observations. The recommendations are all monitor or report back. We have 2 items in front of us with respect to the budget to take action on today. And I guess I'm interested in just understanding in the context of this presentation, are you expressing, ambivalence or reluctance or flagging concern with respect to the action that we're taking today? Or are you seeking to underscore the areas that we should be monitoring closely as we continue to proceed?
The latter.
Okay.
Or the last.
No, thank you. I just wanted to get really clear about that because there's a lot of information being moved forward.
Yeah, we asked for certain reports backs last year. If necessary, we'd recommend a resolution asking for these report backs. And really, a lot of these components are steps that have to be taken in any move to reviewing rates. There's another component that's important. Can we flip ahead in the appendix to slide 14? We haven't really been keeping pace. This shows charts of increases in our overall labor budget. This includes wages, benefits, and cash payments. And the actual are the little boxes. And our rate of increase in those has been below budget and expectation.
So again, I thank you. This is,
Excuse me, the blue dots are the actual. The rate case budgets have been lower.
This is all incredibly important, and I think will certainly necessitate slowly walking through issues as we continue to grapple with them. I am increasingly sensitive to the amount of discussion that takes place around this dais that flags concerns and that flags gaps, but that does not lead to any course alteration. And it's only a matter of time before everything comes together and you've got to make decisions based not on what you project or what you hope or what we'd like to see happen, but on what is occurring. And so I will make the commitment to work with staff, to work with, in particular, the General Manager's Office and CFO, along with the ratepayer advocate and systems to really be thoughtful about how we start to work through some of these questions, issues from the perspective of a decision tree, because I just know we're getting there.
Correct. You understand what I'm trying to say here. In particular, the last recommendation ends with the ability to make trade-offs. This budget makes trade-offs, especially on the power side, by cutting long-discussed items from the budget for next year. And that's slide 22. And so I think that would be part of the discussion in the second report we would ask for by February.
Okay. I didn't keep notes in terms of the actual report back, both that are being requested and by when, but we'll come back at the next board meeting with a resolution and additional instructions regarding the department setting up a reporting schedule around these issues. And Dr. Pickle, I'll work with you on that.
Yes, it's the recommendations are on page 9 of these slides, which will be distributed to you.
Thank you so very much. I appreciate it. Are there any other questions or observations about the report from Ann? Then, seeing none, if we could move to, I think it's item J. We're, get to my piece.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, Jay, filed items.
Okay, yes. To filed items. Are there any questions or comments with respect to filed items? Commissioner Lair, among the filed items are items related to water. Did you have any questions or comments about the report that has been filed, the Water System Monthly Report?
We've had some ongoing questions and conversations about special projects that have, undergoing, whether it's enhancements or planning efforts. And given where we are in a drought for real, how we're going to manage expectations and the qualification in those reports about where water is going to come from.
I'm a little lost, so and just in terms of the report that, the filed report, are there any questions or comments, or what specifically are you making reference to?
Well, we've supported, just like we are with the Elysian Reservoir, Silver Lake, for example. So does that fall in there or not?
Yeah, that's another filed report. Do you have a question or comment about that filed report?
I'm just, what I said was the question, it's a comment about how I am assuming that we are going to get some report back on where the water budget's coming from. And I don't mean budget as in money, I mean water. Where's the water going to come from in the future? What are we promising the community or not, and how we're going to address it? So that's an ongoing conversation we've had.
Yes,
and I'm assuming you're doing some work on that, and so we just want to know, in the same way that we talked about also, what is it, the reservoir in Silver Lake, the smaller one?
Rowena.
And the optic of filling that water back up, because a lot of gallons, and what's the point? So, the optic from the perspective of DWP of doing some projects that are more aesthetic than they are beneficial. So I don't know that, we could just talk about it at some other time when you feel like internally you have a strategy.
Well, someone I've been talking about a couple of those, and we'll brief you on that, but he's had staff kind of analyzing what the possibilities are.
Yes.
Yeah, we can certainly talk about that, Commissioner, offline. Absolutely.
Yes. And I'm answering, so then also the president knows a little bit about it and that we've been talking. Yeah.
Okay. All right. If there are no other questions or comments, then we will move to item K, where we don't have sufficient number of commissioners to take up the minutes. We have left untaken up items 6. I think it's items 5 and 6. No, I'm sorry, items 6 and 7. So I was going to do 6 and 7 at this point, and then we'll go to item 15. I'm sorry, Mr. Wilbur, did you have a question?
No.
No, okay, just fidgeting.
His hands already automatically raised.
He's waving paper. It's like, we turned down the air, so now he's warm. Do I have a recommendation? Is there a motion for items 5 and 6 to pass items, I'm sorry, to
Six and
pass
seven.
items 6 and 7, recommended by Financial Services Organization with respect to the final budget. Do I have a motion for items 6 and 7?
I have a question about number 6.
Yes.
It says annual personnel resolution for the Power Revenue Fund totaling, and it's over 9,000 positions. I wondered if someone could explain that, because that
I can.
That really hurts us in terms of how many people we can hire.
So I can explain. So basically, you know, you see there's 2 items. One's a water budget, one's a power budget. And of course, Joint is a large organization in the middle. All of the charges that Joint spends apportion either to the water or power budgets. And so just as well as that, also the people do as well. So the people are technically assigned or funded under one organization or the other. So that's why the body count is so large in power, when power system itself isn't really that big. And there are some actually same things in the water side. Some organization that water counts as people on paper as water people, but they're not really in some.
Yes, so essentially what was explained in the presentation on the budget, when it comes to taking a formal action on the budget, has to be aligned with either the water or the power fund. And what you're seeing in the resolution is the allocation of those things that were discussed in the presentation formally to the water or power. But all of that adds up to what was explained in the presentation that Ann's system provided earlier before we went on recess. Any other questions?
No.
Is there a motion to approve items 6 and 7? I'll make the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Would you call the roll, please?
Board President McCLAIN-HILL.
Aye.
Commissioner Broad Hopkins.
Aye.
Commissioner Lair.
Aye.
3 ayes, motion passes. Thank you.
All right, we'll move to item 15, where we have item 15 is a grievance report and recommendation that's come forward from the Personnel Relations Committee. And I understand there's a speaker on item 15. Is that speaker present? Sir. Mr. Thang.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name's Paul Tang.
Tang, sorry.
Either way is fine. Thank you for the committee's conclusion that my job duties were always consistent with the Utility Administrator 3, not a UA2, as Power System Senior AGM Andrew Kendall and HR Employment Services had incorrectly claimed during the grievance process. However, this is a partial vindication because even if the board votes in my favor today, I will never be made whole. I was essentially forced out of Power System. While I'm glad to be a part of the water system family, the damages of not remaining a UA3 in power will be unclear for some time. The department has been working on critical initiatives for the past couple of years: diversity, equity, inclusion, and ethics reforms. However, we can have all the offices and procedures we want, but as alluded to in the Racial Equity Action Plan, reforms can't be realized without consistent oversight and accountability. I experienced this firsthand. Those who control or influence the processes can control or influence the outcomes. As an example, in my April 2021 grievance hearing, I agreed to a partial settlement for HR to review my position because I believed they would be independent and fair. I should have known better. In that hearing, Mr. Kendall stated he would provide additional information to HR. Indeed, the HR manager who reviewed my job audit admitted that someone from Mr. Kendall's team told HR to rush their review. While I don't know what else his team told HR or if his team and HR collaborated, from an optics and ethics standpoint, a senior AGM should not be contacting HR about a job audit he already expressed opposition to when HR is supposed to be a neutral third party. Is it possible due to outside influence and implicit bias, HR issued a faulty predetermined ruling against me? Never mind that for the past few years, HR has upgraded several of their own UAs, but if they had applied the same arbitrary standards they applied to me, none of their UAs could have been upgraded. My grievance was always about EEO inequity for power to address my inequity versus other UA3s and their disparate handling of my case versus the other utility administrator 2 in Power Executive Office. As a result, I was retaliated against twice. The first time was during the April 2021 hearing where Mr. Kendall stated that my supervisor's UA4 position would be downgraded after my supervisor retires. The opportunity was there to possibly promote, but by saying that position would be gone, the message was clear that I had no future with power. The second retaliation occurred 5 months after. On October 6th, a letter of agreement between the Department and Management Employees Association was published to upgrade UA1s with time served to UA2s. Upgrades were backdated to March, meaning those UA2s supervising UA1s like me would get a supervisory add-on going back to March. On September 16, 3 weeks before that agreement was signed, Deputy Senior AGM Brian Wilbur directed the reassignment of my UA1. This could have impacted my ongoing grievance when HR routinely denies job audits based on number of employees supervised, and could have denied me 3 weeks of back pay, but I wouldn't know because they never processed the time row corrections to pay me. Power Exec may claim it's power system policy, but policies are written, they're shared with all employees affected by it, and they're applied equally. As far as I'm aware, they made no inquiries with power divisions about their UA2s until after October 6th. Very likely, no other UA2 and water or joint had their reporting structures looked at in that 3-week window. In the context of me bringing up EEO inequity issues through the prescribed grievance process, and that I was singled out in the department, this was a preemptive retaliation by power. At that point, I had no choice but to leave power, even if it meant a self-demotion. If they could be so petty and brazen to deny me a few $100s of back pay, what else would they do to me or my staff to further retaliate if I had stayed? Is it possible someone failed to advise Mr. Kendall against making these questionable decisions? Is it possible he ordered Mr. Wilbur to direct the change in my reporting structure while my grievance was ongoing? Is it possible Senior AGM Rico Kerr saw these unusual things and didn't care or was told to not intervene? Is it possible that at least 3 senior managers engaged in or witnessed unethical personnel actions and did nothing to stop it? In the context of the grievance process, what recourse does an employee have when their grievance is against a senior manager who would ultimately hear their case? And that senior manager can influence not only their direct report division heads, but also the employees' union representatives who are in their direct chain of command, as well as any other groups and processes due to their stature in the department. I may be blackballed or further retaliated against for speaking today. People may spread false rumors and smear my character, but I don't care. It's not about me. It's about right and wrong. It's about doing what's best for this company. If I'm impacted, so be it. But as long as certain managers in this company can engage in sketchy behavior, able to compromise our processes, apply made-up rules that apply to some but not to others, while other managers see things but won't or can't say anything, and without accountability and consequences for those who abuse their power, I'm genuinely concerned it's just a matter of time before the next preventable scandal hits this department again. I appreciate your time. I thank you for listening.
All right. Thank you for your comment. I appreciate your being here, and simply would note that the recommendation that is before the board today is to grant the grievance that was filed by Mr. Tang and to award pay consistent with granting that grievance back 3 years to August 2018. Having sat on the Personnel Committee, I strongly support the granting of the grievance and look forward to, in a different context, working to create the level of transparency and comity that is necessary for all of us to move forward in a way that people feel heard and fairly respected. That's really all I'll say about that, having no insight into the issues that have just been raised and not wishing to cast aspersions on the reputation, character, or intentions of any of the parties that were singled out. Are there any questions from any member of the board with respect to the recommendation around this particular grievance? Hearing no questions, I recommend that we approve L15. Is there a second?
Second.
Would you please call the roll?
Yes, Board President McCLAIN-HILL.
Aye.
Commissioner BARAD Hopkins.
No.
Commissioner LEHRER.
Aye.
Then that motion fails. I have not had the failure of a committee recommendation take place, so I'm not certain what the status would be. Is there something that you need to tell me now, Joe, or we can deal with it later?
At this point, it would be deemed the recommendation not moving forward, but that does not prevent the board from bringing it back for reconsideration at another board meeting.
Okay, terrific. And however, then I just have a quick question for you. In order to bring a matter back for reconsideration, does that matter have to be brought back by someone who is on the prevailing side of the motion?
No, that would actually be reconsidering the vote, but you can bring back the recommendation again.
The recommendation itself. Okay, thank you. Then we will move forward and seek to resolve this particular grievance at a later date. So thank you for that. We'll move on to closed session, and I understand, having spoken to Mr. Rayevich, that with respect to closed session, all items except one can be deferred. That one item has a board letter, which can be taken up for vote in open session, assuming that there are no questions. Is that correct?
Correct, Commissioner. And that one item for a vote would be item M3, for which, as you stated, a board letter was provided. So unless there are any questions, I would request approval of that item.
Terrific. Is there a motion to approve item M3 consistent with the board letter provided by council? Okay, I don't hear a motion for, well, I'll make the motion. Is there a second? There's no motion or second, so we will adjourn into closed session where we can discuss item M3 in closed session. Okay.
Please remain silent until all mics are off.
When would you like to resume
We'll
closed
start
session?
closed session in the next, immediately following this meeting. I've got to walk out of this building in 10 minutes. So.
Very good.
Crazy.
Until we're ready for closed session.
Okay.